Karen demands to go through bear territory, almost gets mauled by a grizzly. So, for a little context, this story is not mine. This happened to my father in the 80s and the 90s, but I will write in first person because English is hard. In the 80s, I lost everything I could. I dropped out of college, my father died of a heart attack, and my mother was somewhere in the wind. I wasn't worth the air I was breathing. As a last effort, I saved up some money to move to a different state so that I could start fresh. I chose Montana to be my new home. Because I didn't have a college degree, I knew I could only make a living with my hands and not my head. After a bit of looking around, I found work on a ranch. The owner of the ranch, let's call him Jack, took me under his wing. He taught me how to ride a horse, how to herd, how to do cutting, roping, and many other useful skills on a ranch. My goal was to have enough money for a deposit so I could buy a house, or at least some land. After about 3 years, I had the money, but I loved the ranch and the folks so much that I chose to stay longer. In the spring of '88, I finally made the decision to quit. I was fully honest with Jack about what my intentions were. I told him that I wanted to buy some land to have a ranch of my own and potentially get married and start a family. Being the absolute champ that he was, Jack offered me some contacts of people who were selling land. After some time, I chose a piece of land near Jack's ranch. I got a loan, bought the land, and in the summer, I started building my house. By winter, the house was done, and it was planned that in the spring I'll build a barn and some fences, corrals, among others. In the spring, it was back to work, and before summer had started, I had nothing to do. I had a lot of time on my hands while I waited for all the paperwork to be done, and I wasn't going to spend 2 weeks sitting on my porch doing nothing when Jack promised me that if I would ever need it, he would give me a job. Now, I didn't need a job because of money, but I just didn't have anything to do. So I went to my good old friend Jack to see if he needed some help. He said that he could use me to guide people on the tours he was offering. His ranch is not only in the cattle business, he also offers tours of the pristine nature on his property. I happily accepted the job despite me not liking people, but still, it was better than just sitting on my front porch and doing nothing. The first few days went without a problem, but then a wild Karen appeared to brighten up the day. I was just returning from a tour when I saw this Karen in the middle of the field yelling at this girl who was also a guide. I didn't know the girl, but in my books, whoever makes a girl cry is a jerk. I came over to them and in the most passive-aggressive tone I can, I say, "Good day. What seems to be the problem?" And Karen's wrath was now aimed at me, and she yelled back, "This girl has no respect for the desires of the customers. Give me a manager now." Now, I didn't expect such strong wording, but I kept my cool despite my hot-headedness, and I came up to the girl who's now sobbing because this Karen was mouthing off to her pretty good. And I say to her, "Leave her to me. I'll take care of her. You go take a break and tell Jack that I'll be with this piece of work." She gives me a grateful smile and a nod and rides away. I go to the Karen and I say, "Ma'am, I can't get you the manager as he's busy right now, but if you want, I can be your guide in her stead for the remainder of the tour." She replies very politely by saying, "Sure, I think even the trees will be better than that girl." Every part of my hot-headed self wants me to pretty much bury this woman right then and there. But I keep my cool and we head off for the tour. And within the first minute, what a piece of work she truly is. She behaves like she knows best, and everyone is lesser than her, and everything should be given to her. When we're about to turn around and go back, I give her a choice. We could either go the official route, or we could return by the unofficial route, which is shorter, but there were bear sightings reported in the past few days. I tell her that the unofficial route is quite dangerous, but just as I wanted her to do so, she vehemently objects because she is the wisest person alive and knows best, I guess. Great, my trap worked. After about 5 miles on this unofficial route, she starts screaming and turns so pale that she's even more white than paper. In the distance, there's a grizzly. I knew about the danger I dragged both of us into, but in the end, it was technically her choice to go that route. I tell her to make herself as big and loud as she can. I follow suit, but the bear keeps getting closer. It keeps growling at us. With every growl, Karen was getting ever more pale. After it gets way too dangerous, I shoot a round out of my rifle, and the bear gets scared and runs away into the woods. The entire ride back, she keeps yelling at me that I put her intentionally in so much danger. And yes, I'll admit it was quite reckless taking a visitor into the part of the woods where there were bear sightings. But technically, she made the decision to go that route. I stay silent the entire ride because I can't keep a straight face. I was laughing maniacally in my head, and I knew that if I looked at her, I would start laughing out loud. When we returned, she was shaking violently and was pale as ever. After I managed to tie up her horse, she demanded that I get her the manager, and I gladly point her to the little building in the distance and she storms off. She starts yelling at Jack, and I can see that Jack is trying his hardest not to break out laughing. I could hear that she was demanding that I be fired, but the neat part was, I wasn't an employee of Jack's. I was doing it as a favor for a friend, and thus, couldn't be fired. After the Karen's tirade ends, Jack comes to me laughing like a kid. He asks me, how did you even come up with that, OP? I start giggling as well and answer, well, she made the girl cry, so I wanted to give her a special treatment. I heard of the bear sightings and it worked out well in my favor. He then asks me not to do that again as it was reckless. I agree and I tell Jack, I don't plan on doing it again. But I had a plan if the bear mauled the damn wretch. My defense would be that I gave her the choice to go on a safer path, but because she was apparently of higher intellect than me, I simply agreed. Jack gives me a smile and heads off. Years later, my father would end up meeting that girl guide again. Her name was Abby, but nowadays, I simply call her Mom. Alright, first of all, who else saw that mom twist coming? Anyone? Anyone? I bet a lot of you did. Other than that, it's just very satisfying to see a Karen get literally what she asked for. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Boss said if they disagree, they should just leave. I left instead. I was a 20-plus employee for an organization with religious ties, in leadership, and the key point person for a lot of things, and pretty good at what I did. There were parts of the organization's religious group's identity that I didn't personally identify with, but felt as though I was making a difference there. I also generally enjoyed the work and knew plenty of other like-minded, what the org would have called liberal, employees there, so I was content. In my state, this organization's religious ties make them exempt from several laws. Most relevant to this story, they are legally allowed to make hiring decisions based on/considering sexuality/sexual identity. While the organization had many constituents who were part of the LGBTQIA+ community and supported those constituents, they did not openly hire members of that community. For years, I felt like a part of my reason for being there was to be a support for those members of the community who were constituents in what was not always a positive environment to them. I had an employee who was an outstanding performer. Really, she was my best employee. She was a standard setter in every way, an absolute peak performer. I had no plans to leave, but if I had plans to leave, I would have recommended her as a successor immediately. The work that she did was important and widespread. It impacted every constituent in the org in one way or another. She was closeted when hired and through a series of life events came out after working several years for me. I was actually surprised at the community response. There were some skeptical folks and people who did the common religious praying for you thing, but many people were supportive. We lived in that bubble for a couple of years, and I took a plan to the supervisor of my direct supervisor, she made the salary/title decisions, to promote this employee for her exemplary work. The conversation started off poorly and ended with, do we really want to encourage her to stay here? And she knew the type of environment she was working in when she took the job. If she disagrees now, she should leave. I knew that in that moment, that boss's boss was inadvertently speaking to me. I don't agree. I should leave. I started the job hunt with one main criteria, found a place that was openly affirming with work that I was eager to learn, and took the job. It's ended up being an incredible fit for me. I love the work, love the people, and, surprise, members of the LGBTQIA+ community can work here and be promoted. I also ended up with a 20% pay increase during my first year, which was wild. While my departure certainly didn't ruin anyone's life, everyone was pretty surprised with my departure. I definitely got my share of panicked, how did you complete this task, or what was this procedure calls, and they haven't been able to fill the role since. Anyway, cheers to finding a workplace that's in alignment with your soul. I agree, it's absolutely important to find a workplace that works with what you believe in, whatever that may be. Good on this OP for taking the initiative with a little bit of malicious compliance mixed in. Careful what you ask for. I went to my husband to a doctor's appointment with a new doctor. My husband had various medical things going on at this point. One thing being that he had very recently had all of his teeth removed. We get into the office and my husband is embarrassed for one and in extreme pain. I was trying to help by answering some of the questions the doctor was asking. So the doctor says just one of you answer. Oh, no problem. I just lean back against the wall behind my husband and start looking around. The doctor realizes that he can't understand what my husband is saying without teeth. He instantly looks at me for an answer and I directly look at him and look away. It takes 4 times for my husband to repeat himself before he gets understood. There were probably a dozen more questions that needed to be answered. It was a joy to watch him squirm. It was a great doctor visit for me after being told he didn't need my input. Be careful what you ask for, doc. I feel like doctors are always the ones to do these sorts of things. Which is weird. I usually think of doctors as very empathetic and caring people, but then stuff like this happens and it's like you clearly just aren't paying attention or something. Very strange. It wasn't in your contract requirements. This story came from an IT coworker who previously worked at a recently expanded data center and was indirectly involved with the legal mess. The data center's company determined that a redundant internet connection was needed and reached out to a few internet service providers with a list of the data center's requirements. One of the service providers underbid the hell out of everyone else. The coworker expressed concerns over that, but management didn't care because the service provider assured them that they would meet all of the requirements. Some time passed and they had heard nothing further from the service provider after the contract was signed. Strange. As the date of the service start approached, the service provider was asked when they were going to visit the data center for a site survey to start their connection. The service provider requested specifications of the data center's connection infrastructure to the internet. Data center said they had no redundant fiber connections and they were expecting the service provider to do the installation work. The email response from the service provider included new people in the email chain. Turns out the requirement didn't specifically state the service provider had to build the cable infrastructure to connect the data center. The service provider's legal team insisted that the contract only required the service provider to allow the data center to access the internet, and the service provider assumed the data center already had the physical infrastructure in place for the tap to be turned on. When the company pushed to have the contract canceled, the service provider's legal team insisted that the company had already agreed to a one-year contract, and they would pay in full even if they couldn't use the internet due to the lack of cables. The outcome of the hostile closed-doors negotiations was that the company backed out of the contract by paying the service provider a sum of money that was equivalent to a few months of service, and restart the bidding, this time with the requirements significantly rewritten. When the same service provider put their offer in again, for some reason it was rejected immediately. Is this really malicious compliance, or was it just like finding a loophole? Because from the sounds of it, if they undercut everyone else, that means that everyone else seemed to have the idea that they would be doing the work, and this one company just thought they could get away with something scuzzy. Honestly, not a huge fan of this example of malicious compliance. Server wanted a big table, so I helped her out. Forgive my possible lack of adequate details. This happened a long time ago, and I don't have the best memory to begin with, but I read a story a bit ago that reminded me of it. When I, F43, was 19 to 20 years old, I worked at the local franchise of a popular steakhouse/buffet as a cashier and hostess. On our busier days, table turnover could be insane, and me having to help clean a table to seat was a normal thing. Servers bust their own tables. We, of course, would seat tables that were already clean, but sometimes customers would prefer a different location that wasn't. Since it was a buffet, this wasn't a huge problem. We would clean while they filled plates. On one very memorable occasion, this happened to me with a bit of a twist. I took a party to a clean table in Blondie's section. I don't know how old she was, but I would wager early 20s, and she had been there longer than I had. Anyway, when we got there, the head of the party said that they would prefer a different table still in Blondie's section, and indicated one that had not been cleaned yet. I flashed my best customer service smile and said it would not be a problem. They started to turn away and I prepared to clean the table for them. All of a sudden, Blondie rushed up to me and said that table was unavailable and would random other table be okay instead. I explained the situation and that they had chosen that table specifically, but she was adamant. She explained that she had wanted that table and another available to merge for larger parties. Tips are almost always better with a large group. I apologized profusely to the current party I was seating and asked if the new table would suffice. They assured me it would be alright and took everything in stride as they made their way to their food. The next time Blondie went into the dish area in the kitchen, less than 10 minutes later, I followed her in and proceeded to tear her a new one. It felt really weird to be so thoroughly dressing down anyone older than me. I was raised with old school morals and the ideas of respect for those older than me. But she had embarrassed me and I told her so, and that what she had done had made it look like I don't know how to do my job. She apologized but held her stance. I was still fuming, so I did what anyone with teenager brain would do. I went to Mom, or rather the head server and her supervisor. I told Mom what she had done and why, and she told me that's fine. If she wants large tables, she can have them. For the next at least 15 to 20 minutes, every large group that came in was seated in her section. Remember, busy day, so this was frequent. She eventually came up to the hostess station and asked me to stop. I told her to talk to Mom. I do think that OP took things a little too harshly, but being a teenager at a job wanting to prove yourself, I get it. The malicious compliance is nice too. Very fitting. You wanted large tables? Sure, hope you can handle it. Coworker plays dumb and benefits. Backfires the next day. I'm currently a pizza delivery driver at a physical store, not for apps. We have a pretty basic dispatch system. Half of the touchscreen is upcoming delivery orders, the other half is a list of drivers sorted by who's been checked in, not clocked in, the longest. It basically ensures deliveries are assigned fairly, so drivers cannot pick and choose the good orders whenever they please. Just yesterday, we had an issue that resulted in a rule change. Here's what happened. Driver Andy was next in line to deliver. Andy delivered the order but forgot to check out said order through the dispatch system. As a result, Andy's name was number 1 in the driver order while the delivery order was also unassigned and still in the store. This is pretty common, and there's no real penalty or punishment if you forget, it's just a silly mistake. When Andy returned, he checked out the delivery he just delivered and immediately checked in. This put his name at number 3 in drive order. This bumped up the number 2 driver, Brian, to the number 1 spot, making the driver order Brian, number 1, myself, number 2, and Andy, number 3. This is correct in how the ordering system would still be if Andy didn't forget to check out his delivery when he was supposed to. Again, this is normally inconsequential, but Brian realized he could try to screw things up in his favor. The orders up for delivery were unknown customer and known customer who tips very well. So when time came for unknown customer to get delivered to, Brian, who is number 1 in order and is supposed to be there, refused to deliver it. And he said, "I'm not next on the order. Andy was number 1 for 20 minutes. I don't know how he's number 3 now, but I'm not delivering it next. It's Andy's turn." Cue a huge waste of time looking at camera footage and the boss not understanding anything. I would elaborate, but it's such a convoluted series of events that just frustrates me thinking about it. It basically boils down to the boss apparently not having object permanence. The boss ultimately decides, "Andy, you're next. Take the order." This completely screws me over as I'm no longer lined up to take the big tipper delivery and Brian is instead. The exact result Brian was hoping for by playing dumb about the dispatch system. Later that Friday, the boss would tell me, "From now on, we're going to go by what the dispatch system says. This will punish the driver that made the mistake like Andy instead of the others." Which is completely false. The only person who got punished by Andy's mistake was me. Andy got to deliver 2 orders back to back, which the dispatch system is supposed to prevent. And Brian benefited from the driver order by getting assigned to the big tipper that I was supposed to go to. I explained this to my boss as well as how ripe for abuse this new rule is. His only response was, "Andy's mistake may have negatively affected you today, but next time it probably won't. This is the only way to solve this type of thing." Again, completely false. We have a history log of what drivers took what orders, which I then pulled up to show the boss's decision made by Andy take 2 deliveries in a row, which also proved Brian was next in line and not Andy, but the boss just shrugged and said that the new rule is the new rule, final say. Next day, Saturday. I clock into my shift and notice that the dispatch system says that Brian is currently checked out on a delivery, but I see his car parked, so he's clearly already back. He's just forgotten to check in. I assume he's either in the bathroom or around the building smoking like usual, ignoring the other duties we have until a delivery is ready. So the driver order is currently number 1, Brian, but he's out, and number 2, me. Then a delivery order comes in, a big one for 8 large pizzas. Big orders usually come with a large tip, but it's not a guarantee. I walk over to the boss and say, "Just making sure, from now on we go by dispatch order regardless of what anyone says, yes?" And he confirms, "Yes, stick to the dispatch order." Perfect. Brian comes out of the bathroom a few minutes later, walks over to the dispatch system and realizes he forgot to check in. So he checks in. As a result, his name moves down below mine in the dispatch system as it thinks he just got back. Normally, as many drivers make this mistake, this wouldn't really affect anything. Brian tells me, "Oh, hey, I was here before you, I just forgot to check in." I say, "Oh, well, boss says we're going by dispatch order now and it says I'm next, so..." Brian walks over to the boss and starts explaining the situation. Meanwhile, the big order is slowly coming out of the oven and getting prepped for delivery. Another driver, Yvonne, friends with Brian, comes back from his lunch break and clocks back in. Brian calls him over, since before Yvonne left the building, he witnessed Brian come back from a delivery and go straight to the bathroom before I ever clocked in for my shift. The boss is annoyed, simply reiterating, "We're going by the dispatch order. OP is next." Brian continues to argue while Yvonne comes over to me and says, "Hey man, you know Brian just forgot to check in and he's actually next, right? You're going to let him take this next delivery. The dispatch order doesn't matter." I tell him, "Sorry. Boss said to go by dispatch order." The big order finishes getting prepped and I check out the delivery under my name and take it to my car. To my surprise, no one ran out to stop me. I didn't think I'd get away with it. This isn't the first time Brian caused a rule change. Normally, when it comes back to bite him in the butt, it's been long enough that the boss forgets and reverts the rule, causing Brian to always get his way. But I guess since it literally happened yesterday, this time it was clearly fresh on the boss's mind, plus I clarified right before it happened. As I'm leaving, Andy drives up to start his shift and I tell him, "I got him." As I'm leaving, Andy drives up to start his shift, and I tell him, "I got him! I stole his order, I'll tell you about it later." The big order did indeed have a big tip, $20, the amount that Brian caused me to lose yesterday. While I was out, Andy told me that a known non-tipper delivery came in. Under normal circumstances, I would have been assigned this order, but Brian's rule change caused him to be assigned this delivery instead. He threw a temper tantrum, refusing to deliver it until the boss forced him to. When Brian returned, he decided to clock out for the day, working less than an hour. Having one less driver on a busy day is bad. It puts us behind on delivery times and causes a ripple effect that makes every order during peak time to become late and cold. This negatively affects everyone. Drivers get stuck delivering already late orders, which means less or no tips. The store gets a low review score for late delivery times and complaints from the customers. The aftermath? For some reason, Saturdays have been relatively slow, so Brian's tantrum didn't affect us. It was actually good, as one less driver meant I got more deliveries. The rule is still in place, unfortunately. It's ripe for abuse, and I'll probably get screwed over by it sooner or later. For example, imagine the 2 Saturday orders were reversed. Brian comes out of the bathroom, checks in, and is placed second. This makes me first in line for no tip. I have very luckily never had to work one of these delivery service jobs, but the systems they have always sound absolutely awful. I'm always happy to see someone's complaint get turned into a rule and it used against them later. Very satisfying. And some quality malicious compliance.